Howdy folks, Rudrose here, and today we will be starting a bit of a new series, I hope, called The Cards That Are Beating You. And today's annoying card combination is going to be Ruby Sapphire. So before we get into that, I do have a video planned for 2-game format. I've just been very busy with not only work as well as just kind of social and other obligations in life, so I apologize, but I just want to make sure I give that video some time. But Ruby Sapphire is a deck that not only have I played quite a bit, it's one I have a lot of experience with because a lot of the people at my locals play, and it's clearly a very strong deck. If you look at the Disney Lorcana North American Championship 2025, which is what we'll be using for a reference for a lot of this, you know, it came in second place. It also had one, 6 placements out of the top 16. So that's pretty good. It was also the most represented deck of the day. And at the event, 32% of Illumineers, which is basically a third of the room, actually brought this deck. So we just know how strong it is and how powerful it is. And it's no surprise, right? It is essentially this game's closest thing to a late game control deck. It has the best removal in the game, which comes from the Ruby Inkwell color, and then it can get to these high-cost cards that most other decks usually can't afford to play because they're just too expensive, but because of the ramp of the Sapphire color, we can get there. Plus, we have card draw to keep our hand full, so it kind of just does everything. Its natural weakness is supposed to be hyper aggro. That doesn't always pan out. I've seen this deck stabilize against the aggro, especially if it can get to a Sisu on Ink 6, which for this deck can be as early as turn 4. But I wanted to focus specifically on what cards I think are the reason this deck is so strong and so prevalent, and why I think it will continue to get strong and prevalent. So let's dive into it. I'll be using Scott Markison's deck as an example. I also have the deck by Pierre-Marc Dugois, as well as I've got Matt Okimoto up here, but we'll mainly be looking at Scott's. I mean, they all run pretty similar cards. So when I look at card games or games in general, I'm a big proponent of balance. I think games are at their most fun when they're well balanced. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is, 50% right in the middle of the road. You can have strong, exciting cards or strong, exciting elements. And I know some players really enjoy that. They want to feel powerful. They want the cards and the decks that pop off and just go crazy and beat your opponent into submission. And I think that's fine every once in a while, but obviously, if a deck or a card like Bucky is just so strong that it's just destroying everything around it, I don't think that's very enjoyable. I think the games are most enjoyable when they're back and forth, and losing is way more enjoyable when it was a close match than when you just get stomped and blown out. So there's a lot of cards in Ruby Sapphire that I don't think are a problem at all. For example, I like that this deck can play Maleficent Dragon. I think this card is totally fine as a 9 cost. Honestly, if I could errata this card, and if you don't know what that means, errata means to essentially change something on the card after it has been printed, so buff it or nerf it, I would actually give her 7 health. I think it's kind of ridiculous that she can die to an Along Came Zeus. And that will be something that's important looking at these cards in this series as well, right? Is cost efficiency. And one of the things I think Lorcana really struggles with actually is efficient removal for a lot of these cards. And we're really going to talk about that with Flaversham. So for example, if I pay 9 for a Maleficent Dragon, and then you just pay 5 for an Along Came Zeus, or you have a character turn sideways and sing it, you're coming out ahead on ink or on efficiency or tempo, whatever your preferred word for that is, because I had to invest 9 ink into this, which is probably most of a turn, if not my entire turn, and you just had to use 4 ink. As a matter of fact, let's just jump right into the poster child, because I hear so many complaints about this card, and understandably. One of the issues with this card is that outside of Ruby, there is no efficient removal for this character. And what I mean by efficient is that a 1-for-1 card trade. So, for example, like I just said, if you play Maleficent Dragon or Sisu, and then they play Along Came Zeus, they took out your character with a single card. You played a card, they played a card, you're 1-for-1 on cards. But with Flaversham, the only ink color that can reliably take him out with a single card is Ruby. With a card like Brawl, which is easily the most efficient answer to him, or this baby Sisu, which can banish him as well. But if you're in Steel, Steel has no card on its own that deals 6 damage, which means you're going to have to commit a Zeus and a Smash, or a Zeus and a Storm Rage On, or a Zeus and then have someone challenge him as well. The only card that can even really get him in quote-unquote one shot is Strength of a Raging Fire, but that requires you to have 6 characters on the board, which is no easy task, especially when this card comes down on turn 4. For a long time in set 5, I actually tried to do Sapphire Steel, And the reason I eventually went off of it was because I was facing nonstop Ruby Sapphire. And when they play a Flaversham on turn 4, or sorry, on turn 3, because they've ramped into it, and it's my turn 3, what can I do on turn 3 as Sapphire Steel to get rid of a Flaversham? The answer is nothing. The answer is absolutely nothing. That Flaversham's at least going to draw 2 cards for the item he banishes on play, probably quest again. I mean, maybe if I have, 2 Captain Hooks that I can run both into him at that point. But he's gotten 4 cards at that point, so what do they care if he goes down? So this is why this card can be so frustrating for people with this massive 6 health pool. Again, you have to spend multiple cards to get rid of him if you're not in Ruby, which is why Ruby is a quote-unquote good counter to him, because at least, hey, you can just drop the Sisu or the Brawl for 3, and then he's gone. So if you were to look at this card, now do I think Flaversham's a problem? I don't. I really like this card, because here's the thing with him. Let's tweak some of his numbers, right? So if you change this 6 to a 5, now he can get banished by an Along Came Zeus. Suddenly he's a lot weaker. And maybe that would be a good thing. Maybe this card is too strong, because I've heard many people saying this card's too strong and it's overpowered and it should be banned. I have heard some people. So that is something you could do. Maybe if he had 5 health instead of 6, it would allow Steel to specifically use Zeus to get rid of him, and then maybe that wouldn't be as much of an issue. I've also heard some people say he should only draw 1 card instead of 2. I think this would make the card unplayable. Because think about that practically. This is not just you play him and you draw 2 cards. You have to get rid of an item that you have on board, which means you had to set up the item. Now, of course, any Ruby Sapphire player wants to start with a good old Popsicle on turn 1, but sometimes they don't see that. But imagine if he only drew 1 card, so you have to not only break an item, you're paying 4 to draw a single card. I mean, he's a worse Maleficent at that point, right? If he only drew a single card, he's a more expensive version of this card, and this has no conditions. This is just play it, draw a card. Flaversham says play him, get rid of an item, and draw a single card. So I think he would be absolutely worthless if he only drew 1 card. So I can understand why he draws 2, and I think he needed to do it on play and on quest. If he didn't do it on play, how many rounds have I played, and perhaps you've played as well, where the Flaversham comes down, gets the initial draw, and then it gets banished by the Brawl or by the Sisu or by whatever. And if you played 4 for nothing, he'd be terrible. Like, this is kind of the engine that makes this deck work. Now, is this a way you could hit the deck? You could, but I think if you banned Hiram, you might just kill the deck outright, and I don't want to kill the deck, even though it annoys me to no end. So I think his biggest issue is his 6 health. He was down to 5. Zeus can answer him. A few more characters could answer him, but that's probably the big thing. But I do think he needed to draw 2, and I do think it needed to be on play and on questing, especially since it requires you to have another piece. And yes, you can make the argument, Popsicle is not a hard piece to have, and I don't disagree. I think this is part of the reason it's so absurd is the Popsicle itself draws a card. Imagine if you're having to banish a card like Vitalosphere or Ice Block, which hasn't given you any immediate value, so to speak, by playing it like the Popsicle did. Now, it's just not this insane engine of draw. If you remember back in set 2, part of the reason that this was so strong, when people were playing the Nick Wild, they would draw 6 cards off a single Popsicle, because turn 1 Popsicle, that's 1 card. The Flaversham would come down and banish it. That's 2 more cards, so a total of 3. Then next turn, they would play Nick Wild, get back the Popsicle, play it, because you can play Nick for 4, and then the Popsicle with your leftover ink. Popsicle draws, that's 4. Flaversham would quest, banish it immediately, draw 2 again, that's 6. So this single Popsicle got you 6 cards. And talking about those items, maybe that's an issue too, is that the item recursion that this set, that Sapphire in particular, has access to. Now, no one really plays Nick Wild anymore, but Tamato, of course, can bring him back later. I like Tamato a lot. I think this card's absolutely fine. I think this card is what a good payoff should be. It's expensive. You have to get to it. You have to build around it. You cannot just jam this in any blue deck ever. If you're not playing items, he's not going to do anything for you. And he's a good late game payoff, so I enjoy Tamato a lot. I think it's actually one of the better design cards in the game. But who cares about the good cards? Let's talk about the cards that are beating you. Tipo and Sail are huge problems and huge buffs for this deck. I want to show you back some of the old inking cards we used to use to get our ramp on. So back in the day, we used to use cards like One Jump Ahead, or Mickey Mouse Detective. People would often go back and forth which of these preferred, but these are uninkable cards, and that is something that has greatly improved the consistency of this deck and why it's gotten better every set. This version that came in second place is only running 14 uninkables. Back in set 3, set 4, it was pretty common to have, like, if you got to 17 uninkables, it was like, oh wow, you kept it kind of low. It was not uncommon to have 19, 20, 21 uninkable cards. But when you have Sail, which is just an insane outright improvement over One Jump Ahead, they both cost 2. Sail is inkable, One Jump is uninkable. And clearly the benefit of One Jump is that, well, 1, it's a song, but 2, it pulls it from the top of your deck, right? So it's not affecting your hand size. Because if you have 5 cards in hand, and then you play a One Jump, you lose that card in hand, now you have 4, and then 1 from the top of the deck. And Sail is supposed to be a quote-unquote detriment because you're having to ink an extra card from your hand. But because it draws you a card, it just completely negates that downside. Like, if it didn't draw you a card, I don't know if you'd even see this card. It also makes Sail such a better card draw in the late game of the deck, which is what has made this even more consistent. If you drew a One Jump Ahead, and I could say this as somebody who played a lot of Ruby Sapphire, drawing a One Jump Ahead with 11 ink and nothing in hand is terrible. That card doesn't do anything. You might even actively hurt yourself because the mystery card you put into your inkwell might have been that Be Prepared you really need. Sail just says spend 2, draw a card. It's kind of like a vision of the future at that point, just where you don't get to get the scout. So Sail is just such a huge improvement for the deck, and same with Tipo. Tipo is inkable. Why would you play uninkable Mickey when you can use Tipo? Now, yes, both of these come from your hand as opposed to the top of the deck, but as we've seen, that if that is a detriment, it's a detriment these players are happily willing to put up with. And Tipo being on a body in particular, I think is more detrimental than it first seems to the opponent. That if you're playing something like Blurple, now you can use a crab to power up the Tipo, and this could technically threaten something. Now they have this tiny character that they can just leave there as protection for a Tremaine, so that when they play their Shark or their Tamatoa, it's not alone on the board where a Tremaine can come down and just swallow it up. And if they are playing something like One Jump Ahead, now they've got a character to sing it with as well. Look at Tala. Look how slow Tala used to be. This had to get banished, so if you played it on turn 2, you had to wait till minimum turn 3, maybe not even then, because sometimes people be like, I'm not going to banish it. Fishbone Quill, I thought and think was a very broken card for what it did, but we don't even run it anymore. People aren't even running any Fishbone Quills because why do they need to? And ramping on 2 essentially takes away the second player disadvantage that you actually get ahead of your opponent on ink. So the ramp in this game is insane, and it's something I want you to say in the comments. If you have experience with ramp styles in other games, like in Magic the Gathering, I only ever played Standard in Magic, so maybe it's out of control, or in Legacy, Modern, any of those older formats. But in Standard, I never recalled ramp being kind of as oppressive as it feels in Disney Lorcana, and I'm not 100% sure why that is. I don't know if it's because Lorcana is a slower game with the inking from hand, or the nature of because you can't challenge ready characters. I don't know. So if you have insight to that, please let me know, because it definitely feels way stronger here in Lorcana than it does in Magic and in any of the other games. Gravestone Dragon you might see on occasion, but that's not, you're going to see Heart of Tefiti, Montanui, Rescue. These are all cards that help you ramp and help you ink. Do you see any of these anymore? No, you see Tipo and Sail. And that's how essentially power creep works. And what happens when more and more cards come out, and when players are making competitive lists like this to win events, they are always going to look for what is the most efficient answer. And the most efficient answers are Tipo and Sail the Azurite Sea. As much as Tipo annoys me for making it more consistent with the inkability, I overall think Tipo is fine. I do think Sail probably shouldn't have been printed, at least in the state it's in. It's also crazy that Sail, Tipo at least puts the ink in exerted. So if they play Tipo on turn 2, yes, they're ramping, but that's it. That's their whole turn. Sail, they can play Sail and then still follow up with a Popsicle or Ice Block or Knowledge and Wisdom, like another 1-cost card, which is just so powerful. And that's what made Fishbone Quill so powerful, was that it gave you the ink to use right away. And no one even uses Fishbone Quill anymore unless it's specifically, it's a whole new world deck, so I'm using it to dump my hand really quick and then refill it. Another card that I think is an issue and has made this deck so good is Vision of the Future. Now, Vision of the Future is clearly a doubled up version of its smaller counterpart, which is Develop Your Brain. Earlier I said Knowledge and Wisdom, sorry. I get this confused with the villainous version of this game a lot, and in that one, there's a fake card called Knowledge and Wisdom. Anyway, so Develop Your Brain, 1, look at 2, put 1 in your hand, the rest of your deck. Well, Vision is just a doubled version of that, right? Hey, pay double the amount of ink, and you look at double the cards, and you still put 1 in your hand. Except, for some reason, instead of looking at the top 4, which would have been a 1-to-1 double up of this, you look at the top 5. Looking at the top 4 is not unprecedented in this game. Ariel Spectacular Singer looks at 4 for a song. But for some reason, Vision looks at the top 5, and it's easy to see why this card pretty much outright replaced Develop. You don't really see Develop anymore because digging 5 deep is huge. In a 60-card deck, 5 cards is a 10th of your deck. So you're getting to scout through a 10th of your deck. That's just so strong. I'm not saying I think this card is broken or that this one should be banned or eroded, but it does kind of bug me that it's double the ink, and for that you get 1 extra card. Like, why isn't it just 4? That would have been consistent, but maybe they just thought that wouldn't be enough. Another reason this deck has gotten so oppressive is this card, and I really liked this card when it was announced. I thought it was pretty well designed. I thought it looked like they actually put some thought into it and that it had some clear upsides, but some clear downsides too, unlike the Hades Legend that came out this set, which just seemed like nothing but downsides. However, having played with it and against it, I think this card is completely overtuned. First off, it's inkable, so again, another inkable card we can add into this pile to keep lowering that uninkable count. Its stats are crazy strong. 7 strength is so powerful, it takes out pretty much everything in the game in one shot other than Tamatoa. It can take out Queen's Castle in one hit, which used to be one of the defenses Purple had against these deck, was that the base Maui, this Maui, hit for 6. He could not take out a Queen's Castle on its own. Well, now this one can. It has evasive for some reason, and I feel like I can hear in their head thinking, well, if it didn't have evasive, then people could go under it with evasive characters and he couldn't challenge them. Right, but I think that should be a good thing. The fact that he's evasive means you can't do that. I will play against these blue decks that will ramp to 6 very quickly, put out a Maui Half Shark, and it's like, okay, what am I going to do? Put out a Genie? I can't quest with this Genie because of his 2 effects, that anytime he challenges a character, you're feeding them action cards. So it's actually a detriment for you to try to send that Genie in there for a quest, because not only is the shark going to snatch it up right away and live, which means he's going to do something else, you're giving him more actions. And then probably the most egregious part I find about this card is the wayfinding, gaining a lore. This card should have been 1 or 2 things: a win condition or a removal card. And currently it is both, and I think that is way too strong. Its job to beat up characters and to get back actions that let you beat up characters, okay, fine, that's one thing. But the fact that it unnecessarily turns into a win condition on its own is ridiculous. You've seen some of these decks cut Lucky Dime entirely, or cut down on the numbers of Lucky Dime, because the Half Shark gets them there. I have played multiple games where people with a shark on board, not even challenging with it, will just then proceed to use, okay, I'm going to sail to draw, I'm going to vision to look at that, I'll cast how far I'll go. By the way, I just gained 3 lore. I've just attached +1 lore to all these cards. Heaven help you if there is a second shark on the board, and now it's, I gained 6 lore by doing all these actions I was going to do anyway. That's dumb. It should not be a win condition as well as a removal piece. It should have been one or the other. Either have the lore and it can't keep getting back the action cards, or it's this beater that gets you back your actions, but that's it. So this card is just insanely overtuned, and I think it's very oppressive when it comes out early. I thought when it was first released, I was like, well, it doesn't do anything when you play it, so maybe that's not a big deal. But again, think of the limited removal that exists in Lorcana. What deals with this? There is nothing in Ruby that hits something that has 7 health. A lot of Ruby's removal is based on your strength being low, being 3 for Medusa, or 2 for Brawl, or 1 for Sisu. The only thing that really deals with this efficiently is a long game Zeus. But beyond that, a lot of decks struggle to deal with this card. And it being evasive means there's stuff you can't even hit it with. You can't run a normal Maui into it, even though he would trade with it. You can't run a Fox into it powered up by a crab, because he's freaking evasive. Finally, last and certainly not least, I think the big card that is beating you, and this is the card I absolutely would ban if you wanted to reel this deck's power in, is the Ice Block. I think the Ice Block gives this deck removal reach that it should not have. With Ice Block, there is almost no characters commonly played in the game that are safe from any of the red removal. A card, like the Merlin Goat, should be safe from the majority of red's removal. They should have to use something big like a Maleficent Dragon or a Be Prepared or challenge it to get rid of this card. But the fact that they can go double Ice Block on your Goat, okay, now I'm going to drop this Sisu and now it wipes the Goat out. Or I've got 2 Ice Blocks, I'll hit 1 Snake, I'll hit your Mr. Smee, and now Sisu hits this card that normally shouldn't hit, is so strong. Or, hey, I've got baby Sisu here, which normally should only be able to take out something like a Flaversham, but I have 2 Ice Blocks, so now actually I'm going to take out your Mr. Smee as well, or I'm going to take out your White Rose. I think Ice Block is a big part of the reason why this deck is so successful, because it just allows them to get rid of these cards that they really shouldn't be able to get rid of. If Ice Block was banned, if they didn't have this, your Goat would be safe. They would have to challenge it. They would have to use that bigger removal for it. They wouldn't just get to, nah, it's okay, my Sisu's just going to take it out. Oh, it's a red blue mirror. Let's see, what did you put down? Oh, you put down your own Sisu? Yeah, no big deal. Double Ice Block. Here's my Medusa. It's gone. Like, they wouldn't be able to do that anymore. If I were to errata Ice Block, I think it should have cost ink for its effect. It's crazy to me that for 1 ink, you can put this down and then just forever for the rest of the game for free. You not only give your removal reach, your spot removal, it helps your challenging. So now, if you're going against an opposing Maui, I've seen this all the time against red-purple or a red-blue mirror, they have a normal Maui, and then I have a normal Maui, but I have 2 Ice Blocks, so your Maui only hits back for 4, so now my Maui survives. That's huge. That's so big. I've seen people use on something as small as Tipo. Hey, I'm going to lower your broom. You put a magic broom out turn 1, or, whatever. My Tipo goes in and challenges it, takes no damage in return. So now I can finish you off with my Tipo next turn and keep it. And if you counter challenge me, you'll get banished and I won't. So I think Ice Block is a big problem for this deck. And I think if you got rid of it, I think that would help pull this deck in line a lot. It would cut off its removal reach, it would keep its characters less safe, and force it to trade with you. I want the deck to be strong, I want it to be good. It's a late game control deck. When it gets to that point, it should be super strong. It should give you a reason to invest this time in this ink. However, currently, I think it is very overtuned, and it's one of the few ink colors that has just gotten a buff every single set. It's gotten more efficient, better cards, less uninkables, and if the way it's going, I don't see that changing unless they start printing just kind of crummy cards for red and blue, which also kind of sucks too, right? Because then that hurts all the other colors. If they don't print good Ruby cards, not only are you hurting Ruby Sapphire, you're hurting Ruby Purple, Ruby Amethyst, you're hurting Ruby Amber. All the red base decks suffer. So those are the cards that I think are the most problematic in Ruby Sapphire. Let me know what other ink color combinations you would like to see, and let me know if there are any cards I missed that you think are also a big problem and why this deck is so strong, or ones that you disagree with and you think, no, actually, I love those cards, and that's what makes the deck so fun. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate you so much, and until next time, take care.